All right, thank you so much, Jill, and thank you guys for coming out tonight. It's great to see all of you. I'm Jonathan Zempel. I'm the Director of Design Systems at Zendesk, and tonight we're going to talk about design systems. So, what is a design system? Maybe formal definition is a design system is a collaboration tool made of reusable components with guided by clear standards and can be assembled together to build any number of applications. Or as I like to say, we build the bits and bobs of Zendesk UI. And then we help you choose when to use a bit and how to use a bob. So my journey with design systems began about 4 years ago, before the term design system was really even a thing. And there are a handful of learnings that I've, actually a whole bunch of things that I've learned along the way, and I'm just going to share a handful of those with you tonight. So first of all, I think design systems are fun. At Zendesk, we're using all the latest hotness from nested sketch symbols distributed by Envision DSM, and those have corresponding React components. We're exploiting the coolest patterns like render prop for those. But despite the technology, which is fun and we're having a great time playing with shiny things, the real fun happens when you see product designs locking into shared patterns, Scrum teams that are able to shave serious time off their product schedules, and basic user delight as people learn to leverage the design system to solve really complex product challenges. And I believe that when you're having fun building your product, your customers are the ultimate beneficiaries. So although design systems are fun, it is true that design systems are hard. So when you think about the value proposition connected with a statement like, hey, we'll build those fussy buttons for you so you can focus on bigger problems, it kind of sounds like a no-brainer. But when you're at a fast-paced company with evolving technology, there's going to be procedures, processes, and technology stacks that you're going to have to work with. And you're going to, if your situation is anything like mine, you're going to unintentionally and inevitably step on a few toes. But thankfully, I had a lot of help at Zendesk. From the technical founder on down, there were people who were well prepared to understand that a design system was going to be an important piece in the puzzle of our organizational growth. So when the going gets tough, it takes a team, and that brings us to our third point, which is design systems are a team effort. And of course, you need to assemble a core team to work on your design system. I operated solo for way too long, and it wasn't until we hired our first key design and developer hires that we really started producing our system in earnest. But that's not exactly the team I'm talking about here. I think it's important to reach out and make friends throughout your company, people who are interested in design systems, people who can advocate for design consistency, and individuals who can help maybe even implement components that satisfy various product requirements. We did this at Zendesk, and it's really been a game changer. Acceptance rates for the system have climbed dramatically, while costs for producing UI have diminished impressively. And this didn't happen until we were able to convert a handful of key allies to help us spread the word. So we believe that no design system can be successful without, well, design. Our system starts and ends with design, or what is termed de-thinking. And the system that happens in between is simply a product of the de-thinking process. We call our system Garden, and it's my pleasure to introduce Allison Shaw, who is the lead designer for Garden. Allison is going to take us deeper into the de-thinking process that's making Garden successful at Zendesk. Take Take it away, Allison.
I'm very fancy. Hi, I'm Allison. Like Jonathan said, I'm the lead designer on the garden design system. I've been with Zendesk for just under a year, and it's been one of the most fun, rewarding years of my career so far. So Jonathan was talking about dethinking, and I'm going to bring us a little bit deeper on that. For the engineers in the room, can you raise your hands really quick? Are there engineers here? There's got to be some. Okay. Don't let your eyes glaze over. Because dethinking is for everybody. It's not just for designers. Can I have designers raise their hands also? We're not? Okay. All right. Designers, you're not off the hook today. Dethinking also includes technical aspects. I see designers and engineers as being two sides of the very same coin. We all want the same things, right? We want beautiful, efficient products that solve real problems. Our means are different, but we have to understand each other. And designers, you don't have to know how to code. And engineers, you don't have to know how to design. But we do need to be able to converse with each other in a common language. So designers, we need to know how code works. We need to be able to understand logic and conditions. We need to be able to understand how the browser renders HTML and CSS. We have to be able to visualize the impacts of internationalization and meet the needs of people with accessibility requirements. And if an engineer tells you that the design you made won't work because of a technical complication on the back end, you need to be able to understand what they're saying and be able to collaborate with them on ways to approach the problem so that you can get a good result. Engineers need to understand how design works. You probably actually already know the basic principles of color, typography, layout, and consistency, even if you don't think you do. You can probably look at a well-designed piece of software and know that it is better than a poorly designed piece of software, even if you can't exactly verbalize why. What I'd ask of you is your curiosity. Ask yourselves what makes something well-designed versus something that's not. Is it the number of clicks that it takes to accomplish a task? Is it having a clear objective on every screen? Is it the beautiful typography, the delightful animations, or is it something else? You have to trust that you can learn this stuff. And it can feel really hard to learn these different sides of the craft. It can be hard to learn a different discipline because it's so different from what we're doing every day. Right brain, left brain. But it's worth it because in the end, again, we all have that same goal. Beautiful, simple solutions for our customers. But we can't build great products with just one discipline, right? Design with no engineering is just a non-functional prototype. And engineering without design might be functional, but it probably won't be fun to use. Teams that can speak the same language, that can understand each other, are better able to move as one. So, at the heart of design thinking is our end user. And that's a huge, huge thing to remember when you're building a design system, because they are collaboration tools for designers and engineers and product managers, but we don't build a design system for the internal audience. We build it for the people who will be the ones to actually use the product. Every single decision gets focused onto those customers. So, a component in Garden is comprised of three main ingredients that work together to best serve our end users. The first one is visual and interaction design. Then you need code that actually renders in the browser that includes localization and accessibility features. And you also need robust documentation so that people who are using your system, those engineers and those designers, are actually able to understand the capabilities and how to use the system. So I'm going to walk you through the design process. So the first step is that you have to decide what to build. Design systems are not the place for experimentation. They're also not places for UI and patterns that are specific to only a particular product or worse, a particular feature. At least this is true in Garden's case, right? We're building a system that supports all 7 of our products. Now, the components that go into Garden, like I said, need to serve those equally. And so when we're deciding what to work on, we need to balance our options against impact and also effort. We want the garden design system to solve common problems, whether those are easy, whether those are hard, whether those are esoteric. We want to solve the common problems so that our teams who are actually working on creating the new software are able to focus on the problems that are specific to them. The next thing that you have to do once you decide what to build is define what it actually needs to do. So I'm going to be looking at an example that we did over the summer. We created a tables component. Tables are pretty familiar to everybody, right? You've got an organizational matrix of information, you've got some headers up at the top, and you've got some body rows and columns that kind of fill that out. So in order to figure out what a garden table needs to do, we needed to look at a lot of the different implementations that are already inside our products. So how do the different products enable our users to achieve the same things? What elements in our chat application, what do they include in their main dashboard? And how is that similar to what support has in its main dashboard? How is it different? What do the different visual treatments of tables look like? And how do they interact with other elements on the page? Once we have a good understanding here, we put together a document that lays out the problem we're trying to solve, very specifically, the requirements, and then any ideas that we know we want to explore. We use Dropbox Paper for these design documents, and I'll get to why we do that in a little bit. So the next step is kind of what people tend to think of as design, right? It's the visual and interaction design part of the process. Now, Garden's visual language is very straightforward. We only use 2 type weights, regular and semi-bold, and most of our UI is built using a spectrum of grays with splashes of color that help to signal interactivity and focus the user on main actions. Which is to say that most of the work that goes into designing a table isn't about what it looks like, but more about how it works and how it relates to the rest of the page elements. So how do you sort a table, for instance? How do you organize and arrange it? Is organizing and arranging different than sorting? What about users who prefer more information density or the opposite? What about scrolling? Should the table headers fix themselves to the top of the page, or should they scroll away? Some backends support infinite loading, virtual scrolling, but others will only support pagination. So how do we handle that? Once you have a solid round 1, it's time to share with the broader product team and the garden engineers and get feedback. Every design decision that we make has a rationale, and it's important to document not only the decisions that were made, but also how we got there. So, like I said, we use Dropbox Paper for this. We document the different options that were considered, and we talk about their pros and their cons to help spur a conversation. At this point, the designers can start to try these new ideas out in their own work and give us feedback on what's working for them and what isn't. And also point out any use cases that we may have overlooked or not considered properly. Now, it's really important for design system designers to be pretty pushy with their design teams and their engineers about giving feedback. I can't do my job without having that feedback from the broader team, because while my end user is the customer, my fellow designers and my engineers need to be able to use my work in order to do theirs. So if I'm missing something that they need, they can't use the thing that I've worked on. Now, Dropbox Paper is really a great tool for this because A, it's really easy to copy and paste images directly in. It's a lovely writing platform. Plays nicely to the design sensibilities. But most importantly, it allows highlighting and also pinpointing on images. So you can see up there, there's a little 1, and that 1 means that someone actually opened this image, clicked on a particular spot in there, and made a comment specifically relating to a very specific element that they were pointing at. And so that lets us have a really nice conversation in context when we're going through the feedback rounds. So next up is iteration. We respond to the feedback from our designers and our developers, and we start thinking more deeply about edge cases, internationalization, and accessibility. How does a component respond to having really long strings or really short ones in the cases of different languages? Do you wrap lines in a row header, or do you truncate them? How do you handle the scrolling that happens within the table, or supporting menus that affect entire parts of the table or just specific rows? Iteration can go through several rounds. In tables, we went through, I think, about 4 rounds, with more paper documents and calls for feedback each time. It can get kind of spirited, which is fun. And sometimes the iteration actually happens in Sketch in our design tools as you come to think of them normally. But sometimes it happens through pairing with Austin or Jonathan and working directly with them on code. And I think that's a really important thing to say, is that there is no specified time to hand off work between the designer and the developer. Once the design starts to feel solidified enough, that's when you start working together. There's no one single time for us to say, okay, now it's time to start doing development on this thing. You can't throw it over the wall. The thing that's great about this is that it works also for documentation. Once something is finished, we never have to stop and wait and document something because we've been documenting those decisions all along. It's important to make pairing and documentation a part of your process, right in the fabric of that process. So that is the general flow of getting a component into the design system. And I know I said we don't do handoffs, but I'm gonna hand it off to Austin. Yes, thank God. So Austin is an incredible developer. He's really sped up the adoption of Garden in the entire Zendesk ecosystem. And I'm not kidding you, he has single-handedly shaved months off of the development timelines for some of our features. So let's give it up for him.
What an introduction. Hey everyone, my name is Austin, and I'm an engineer on the Garden design system. Today I'm going to speak to you about some of the assets that we provide to engineering teams across all the products in Zendesk, how we interact with designers, some of the unique things that we do on the engineering side to help enforce all the work that Allison and all the other product designers within Zendesk iterate on, and there's going to be a demo at the end, which is cool. So with engineering on Garden, we provide several different types of assets. That goes from SVG icons and packages for different teams and products to use, to common linting, code configurations, kind of the starting basis of a lot of front-end projects. Visual assets and CSS packages that allow teams that are not using JavaScript to use Garden styling and all the visual assets that the designers work on. And what we'll be speaking most about today is our React components. These are kind of the most popular consumption model that we see right now within Zendesk, and it helps kind of accomplish all those goals that Allison was talking about in the de-thinking process in a single consumable asset for people to use. So within Garden, we have several engineering goals. These don't go against the design goals that Allison mentioned with the de-thinking process. They complement them, I think, really well. They're going to have some different names compared to what Allison mentioned, but they map really well together. And I think her metaphor for the engineering and design being two sides of the same coin is really important for having a evolving modern product. Anything that you work on has trade-offs, whether it's time for engineering or look and feel, localization, that type of thing. And it's really important to see how those interact. So the first goal of the Garden engineering assets that we have is it has to be styled. We are a design system. I am an engineer, but I have kind of learned to appreciate a lot of the visual assets and the hard work that goes into the very minute details that make a large difference across our products when it comes to consistency, localization rules, that type of thing. It is very specific, but it makes a large difference when it comes to our full range of products. Second is keyboard navigable. So the people that use Zendesk spend a surprising amount of time in it. This is a lot of times their job, and if they don't have a good power user experience, it normally doesn't end well. And they're not able to do their job as efficiently as they should be able to. So keyboard navigation, and specifically consistent keyboard navigation across all of our components and products, is something that we strive for in the Garden Design System to be able to provide that for all the teams. Along with keyboard navigation is accessibility. This is something that I think as a product grows and as a company grows as well, it isn't necessarily something that you think about. It's always an afterthought. And historically, when I've done development before I came to Zendesk, it was not even a thought, which is sad. Besides it just being the right thing to do, to be able to allow all users to interact with your product, it is, for Zendesk specifically, as we kind of move up market into more enterprise spaces, it is a contractual requirement a lot of times. And it is hard to make a consistently accessible experience across all the different types of UI that we provide. But it is a goal of the Garden engineering system. And the fourth item, the fourth and final one, is localization. We support over 23 languages, I think at last count, and up to 60 community provided ones, but 23 officially. And there are many different ways, I think, as most people here know more than in San Francisco, but there are many different ways of visualizing localization correctly, and there are many ways to do it wrong as well. So providing a consistent localization experience for RTL, left to right languages, including on the design side, a lot of work on making sure we don't force uppercase in languages that should not have that. So these four goals on the engineering side, being styled, keyword navigable, accessible, and localizable, are not specific to Zendesk. Just to be frank, these are goals that almost every design system strives to achieve, whether it's Zendesk or not. The differentiator, I think, at Zendesk is how we approach it. Most companies, including Zendesk, currently and historically, approach those four goals with the concept of a high abstraction API. So I know there's probably very few engineers in the audience, but for the designers, like Allison was saying, don't let the eyes gloss over. This is kind of I would say, a very important concept to have as you're designing and working with engineers. So most design systems have this concept of a high abstraction API, and I think visualizing this is probably the easiest way. This is in React, but you don't have to understand code to really understand it. The whole concept of a high abstraction API is you have a single component that encompasses all of the goals that I mentioned before. So in this case, a text input, this has all the styling provided by the Garden Design System. It has all of the keyboard navigation. You're able to tab into the input. It has all of the accessibility built in for forms and screen readers, and it has localization built in, but not visualized here. It has RTL, accessibility. So the pros of something like that API is that small code, big changes. You're able to encompass everything into a single component. It covers the 99% use case where most text inputs will look like this, and it meets all those goals in a single, easy-to-consume package. The problem with this, though, is that you run into a lot of manual additions and customizations. At any point, if you want to make a very small, minute change in an API like this, say you want to make the label slightly more bold or change the order of a hint or a message, a lot of times you have to make large-scale changes, breaking changes in products, or even worse, an engineer has to say this doesn't work for their needs and write their own. And this happens quite a bit when you look at design systems across the other industries, where if you're using, say, material design or material UI in your product and this text input does not fit your exact use case, then you have to roll your own and make it look the same, but you lose the keyboard navigation, the accessibility, and the localization. So this input is actually not just unique to other products. This is something that we actually have at Zendesk. So this is actually a property sheet for a text input that we have within Garden. You can't read it because it is way too long. There are a lot of kind of customization things that whenever a single product needs a new use case for something, maybe an on-copy event or an on-paste event, they make a pull request to add it in, and it works for them, but it may not be needed in other products. And so this high abstraction works well because it provides everything out of the box, but you run into this issue where you start adding in these one-off customizations. So within Garden, we solve this by providing more than just that high abstraction API. This is kind of our differentiator. So by default, we still offer those high abstraction elements though, and it covers the 99% use case within Zendesk, and by making that the easiest thing to achieve without the customization, if it covers that many use cases, we need to make that the easiest thing to do. So we still provide those high abstraction APIs, just like the text input, but we treat it as a single element that we call elements. These elements actually are written with two other assets that we make available to developers. So an element is implemented with a container and a view. So the breakdown for this is a view is the design, the styled assets that have no logic, accessibility, or anything like that. Just treat it as a single styled container that you can provide to an engineer and they can use it. The container is the interaction pattern, the keyboard navigation, accessibility, and localization. So like what Allison was saying, the vast majority of time that a designer spends in a product is not with pixels. I think all of you can agree that the really hard problems are not in Sketch, it's in how you decide the interaction between composite elements, how you move across the page, how a user enters a workflow, goes into the next workflow, and a lot of those come down to how they interact between components and that accessibility model around that, and that is all abstracted into a container. So the cool concept that we have with it is these are all used interchangeably. So previously, if you had to make a small visual change to an element, you could not use it at all. You had to start from scratch. With this model, when an element isn't flexible enough to use within the product, which we have many consistent areas, but each of those individual products has very specific users and very specific use cases that require flexibility within the system. It is a system of guidelines, not a system of law, sometimes. So, the point is to have the flexibility built into where when an element doesn't work, an engineer or a team can make the decision to use a container, which includes the keyboard navigation, accessibility, and localization with any visualization that they need. Normally it is a small tweak, but you can get some pretty cool results with it when you take the next step and kind of use some other visualizations. So, yeah, 3 separate elements. So, that was a really cool transition. So the best way to, yeah, so I'm not a designer. You can tell someone else made the slide. So the best way to show this concept is with a demo. Before I open up, just want to let you guys know, there is going to be kind of some walkthroughs of code examples, but they will be the same kind of level as what you've seen before. So there is kind of no technical knowledge needed for this. It's just a way to kind of show some of the properties that we have within the design system that we give to engineers and other teams. Hold on, let me move. Okay, so let me go and zoom in a little bit so we can actually see what's going on here. So before I really get into everything, the purpose of this demo is really to show some of the cool concept that having that high abstraction API provides to your product teams, and some of the really cool unique use cases that you can see when you use that container pattern. So getting started here, you can see at the top we have kind of a collection of elements that we're able to import from the Garden design system. The first one is a Zendesk icon that you can See right here, we have a home icon as well, and this kind of mimics the sidebar that you're seeing. And then several of the elements that we have in something that we call Chrome. So Chrome within Zendesk is the shared navigation sidebar and the header. This is one of the kind of core concepts that we have across Zendesk for all of our product suite. So regardless of the kind of unique challenges that each product has, there's a consistent experience when interacting between all those different products. So with this, it allows a developer to have a very kind of quick running Zendesk product in a matter of minutes, where previously without this, even with 7 products, I think we had much more than 7 implementations of a sidebar, which is surprising. So this was kind of an effort to help make more consistent UI, especially around navigation across Zendesk. So a quick overview of kind of what you can see provided by this is the Chrome component, which is kind of a page wrapper. Even though it's just a single div on the screen within React, that's actually providing font family, several default overrides for buttons, elements that we want to enforce across the product, hidden accessibility state used for screen readers, and a few other concepts. For a navigation and the navigation item, there are kind of a lot of visual states across all the products that we have baked into this. So you can see how easy it is to add in a nav item, provide it an icon, give it a title for accessibility, that kind of concept. Additionally, some products have different visualizations for the sidebar. So this is something that normally a developer would have to hand make for the product, where within Garden we can kind of make these assumptions for them and provide them the 99% use case where specifically with navigation there shouldn't be much variation between products. So navigation is kind of the simplest one to start with. Let's go into some that has a little bit of accessibility. So breadcrumbs, which you can see up top, that was the main addition. Traditionally, when you think of breadcrumbs, it's a very simple component. It's just pages, links, and separators, and maybe a slightly different visual styling for your current page. This actually doesn't have any state in it, and by that I mean there isn't any focused or selected state, it's just elements on a page. What we found is when we provided an element just like this, whenever there was a small change, that change would make them eject and not use the element and kind of do their own custom styling. But when they did that, they would lose all of the accessibility provided by the component. So even for breadcrumbs, which is very simple, I would say it looks very, very easy to do, there is a surprising amount of hidden accessibility state. So the first element that you see is that high abstraction API, that single component that handles all the 4 goals within the Garden engineering system, which by that I mean you can pass it whatever you want. It applies our style bits to it, applies our separators, selected states, and accessibility. It's all kind of handled out of the box. To the right is actually an implementation of our container. Since we're not an engineering heavy audience, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the idea is you can apply the accessibility that we use within the element to any visual representation. And by that, I mean you can make something that looks completely different from Garden, have the same accessibility, keyboard navigation, and localization that we try to maintain and spend the vast majority of our time trying to perfect. Obviously, within Zendesk, we don't want our teams to do that, but the flexibility that this shows really kind of helps our teams develop their products and solve those small differences that their users run into. At the bottom, you can kind of see an example of what is actually rendered up above. It's kind of segmented out, but just an example of the accessibility state within breadcrumbs. Some of the most common ones are it needs a role of navigation, an ARIA label, which is a breadcrumb, and an ARIA current. So each of these help screen readers and blind users and any user that is using screen assistive technologies actually read, understand, and interact with your page. And every single element within the Zendesk products that use Garden, even down to a button, a text field, tabs, has this level of accessibility built in, which is something that is kind of unique across most design systems. So the next part is kind of something that we call the magic show. This gets me really excited. So with this element container view split, you can do some really exciting things that you can't do with most design systems. So this is a very simple example written in Garden. It uses our elements, containers, and our visual elements to have a simple breadcrumb element, some tabs which have state. They also have keyboard interaction, if you can see the focus state going between it. If I had a screen reader running, it would actually be reading off the state and the currently selected focus tabs, including the locale that the current browser is in, including some kind of cool state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type one-handed. I didn't know I'd have this, but this is just a list of animals. So I'm going to do a raccoon with the name of Trash Panda. Fine nickname. So quick example, just a stateful example of, even though it looks very simple, there is keyboard state accessibility and a lot of kind of behind the scenes things going within the components. So kitchen sink, this is a very small subset of the components that we provide within Garden. Let me go and zoom out one level. So you can see some of our alerts. These have focus states as well, relating to accessibility. Labels, tags, buttons, even button groups have accessibility relating to the focus state. So this is the magic show part. So on the left-hand side panel, you can see 4 different design systems. The visual aspect of the design system, we have Garden, Bootstrap, Material Design, and the Lightning design system. These 4 design systems have very different visual aspects. Obviously at Zendesk, we spend a lot of our time with the branding and the visual aspects of our designs, but that is only one goal out of what we provide to our end users. The keyboard navigation, the localization, and accessibility are always constant. Regardless of the visualization and how we show it in a product, those are always there. So this is an example of us using the Garden containers to still have the same interaction pattern that we have across all the Zendesk products, but it is now using Bootstrap. So the reason this is cool is because even though the visual has changed, the accessibility is still there. The keyboard navigation is still there and the localization is still there. The only asset that we've changed is the visual. And as you guys know in design, the new hotness comes every week, and as designs iterate and change, and even within Zendesk, as we explore new features and ways of visualizing the hard problems that we solve to our users, that will continually change, but the accessibility and our interaction model should not. So the cool thing that we found with this is, obviously we don't want to do this for our products, we don't want to have Bootstrap running in it, but the power that and the flexibility that this shows is something that we leverage every day within the products. So going back to the example, you can kind of see it's bootstrappy. We have, what would be a good one? Snake. Let's go and jump over to material design. So very different, but every single visual element is still using the containers internally. So even though the animation is very different, this is actually using the Material UI React component library internally, which I know a lot of the engineers have probably seen before. That library actually doesn't have a lot of accessibility baked in, and that's one of the main reasons that a lot of other products do not use it. With this Garden container, it is actually fully accessible and implemented with the WAI ARIA design patterns. So for a snake, let's call it a danger noodle. And let's go and add that in. So all the animation states, all that is the same and applicable to that design system, but all the accessibility and interaction is still there. So let's go and jump over to Lightning. Lightning is very different than kind of the design methodology for the visual side that we have within Zendesk. But even something as simple as tabs, which is something that is not provided by that design system, the keyboard navigation, the actual user interaction, is handled out of the box while using the Garden container. And another cool thing is all of these design systems actually don't come with RTL out of the box, but because it's wrapped within our containers and the Garden navigation, you can do some pretty cool and exciting things just out of the box. So this is 0 changes to the different design systems. This is all provided out of the box by the Zendesk Chrome. So with that, I'd like to bring Jay-Z up to go over kind of everything that makes Zendesk Garden Zendesk Garden. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Austin. I'm gonna find my way back here. Hope you enjoyed that. So at Zendesk, we really value our extreme sports. As it turns out, I'm preparing for my own extreme sport coming up in April. I'm gonna do something called a Go Ruck. Permit me to just kind of like sound off about this, but a Go Ruck is a hike that lasts through the night with a ruck on your back. A ruck is a backpack loaded with weight, and my hike is going to be led by a former United States Navy SEAL who his job is to make this the basically the 12 most miserable hours of my life. And I'll be doing this with about a dozen people I've never met before. And the goal is to learn how to work together, how to suffer together, and basically see if we can make it out alive. So if you remember nothing else from our talk tonight, remember this. A design system is like a Go Ruck. It's fun, but it's hard. And it requires a team effort to survive. And when you make it through, you'll accomplish far more than you could ever imagine, expanding your team's capacity for kick-ass work. We follow these design presentations. We're big fans of design systems, and this really can tend to come off like a huge pat on our own back. We've done a lot of great work, right? I think so. Anyway, yeah. Let's hear it for us. But I'm excited to announce for the first time publicly tonight that these components, the garden, is on the fast track for open source. And when that happens, you're going to be able to use Garden as the basis, if you would like to build your own beautiful design system. And what that means is you get all this great keyboard navigation, RTL layouts, accessibility for free. And we think that's really cool, and we're excited to see how Garden is going to work for you. So thank you all. You've been a great audience. It's a real pleasure, and go forth and design your own bits and bobs. Thanks so much. All right, with a little transition here, we'd love to take some of your questions. I'll let Allison figure out where we're at. Okay. I'll try and go through these, and then I can hand off to you guys. All right. Shall we get started with your questions? Any tips for starting a design system? For example, where to begin, how to get buy-in, and when can it be a first cut of what you consider a design system? I'll give this a shot. Get started. I think that's super important. We still have, if you try super hard, we have like a legacy website sitting out there, and it looks like ABC. It's avatars, buttons, and colors. I don't know. This is like the first 3 things that the designers wanted to do, and it's kind of embarrassing. And I want to reiterate that thing, that comment I made about you're gonna inevitably and unintentionally step on toes. It's gonna happen. Get used to it, make friends, but get started, and swap out buttons. I think that's a great starter for getting a design system going. Next question. If my product is already fragmented and inconsistent to begin with, how do I salvage it with a design system without being too intrusive?
You will be intrusive, and that is the job of the design system. A design system's job is to help create clarity around what should I be doing here, efficiency so that once I know what I should be doing, I can do it, and consistency, meaning that if it's done over there, then I can do it over here. You will inevitably, like Jonathan said, kind of ruffle some feathers. The way to kind of start salvaging these things is to also do what Jonathan said, which is make friends, start small. Start with the things that are really kind of just everywhere, which is a button. Buttons are actually like really obnoxiously hard to implement the right way, and if you have a design system with a button that's easy to use, it will get used, and that's your first step.
Austin wants to add in?
Another thing with that, when it is fragmented, it can be hard to convince teams to maybe start using the design system. One way around that is a lot of times when you're working with an individual team and a product manager and trying to convince them to use it, a lot of the benefits that I would say designers have historically had with design systems is it leads to it looking better. It looks consistent, those type of things. A lot of times when you're working within a single team, that may not be a priority for your roadmap within the next quarter. It should be, but it may not be with the team that you're working with. Probably the easiest way to work around that is to have a design system that allows those kind of small code, big changes moments to where you can say, you can spend 6 months implementing this, or you can use something that's already been implemented in the design system and it will take a week to do. And those type of time changes and technical debt reductions are kind of a good driving force to get a PM and a team of engineers to kind of want to work, use, and introduce a design system into an area that may not need it or may not have had it before.
Design question.
This question is from Fiza? If you stand up, Jill will, or one of us, will run over some swag gifts for you. All right, it's right there. Okay, so thank you for the question. How do you maintain sketch files and ensure designers are always using the latest? Are there any library systems that we're using? It definitely can be a challenge. The way that we've kind of approached this is to use a tool called Brand AI, which has been purchased by Envision and is going to roll out as their design system manager. What it does is allow us to take whatever changes we've made, whatever updates we've made, and bring them into this kind of like third-party manager. And then that tool is essentially like a visual picker. So you bring that up when you're in Sketch, and designers can drag and drop elements directly into their Sketch documents. When we issue an update, they just have to update through the DSM, and those changes populate into their design file. So it kind of all happens automatically. For those of you who don't want to purchase an additional tool, the Sketch libraries are a nice new feature. They only work with symbols, which is a key thing to keep in mind. Not all designers like working with symbols, so you have to balance that choice. And, okay. Oh.
Oh, no, you got it. We tend to fight a lot because I'm an engineer, she's a designer. So.
So the person who asked this question also raise your hand. You will also get swag. All right, Jill. All right. how does Zendesk validate or user test the changes made through the design systems, and how is the overall impact measured? So the way that we tend to handle user testing, we will sometimes do user testing on patterns that we're introducing, but the new methodology that we're looking to roll out is to actually have our designers who are using the design system to kind of do that work for us while they're going ahead and testing out their workflows. Even with 2 designers and 3 engineers on our team, we're really small for the kind of audience and the kind of work that we have to produce. So if we can have our designers kind of do that kind of validation work for us, not only is it a way for them to contribute back into the system and keep the ecosystem healthy, but it also helps us move more quickly.
Minaka asks, how do you handle updating the design system when your designs change during development? Thank you. That's a great question, and we kind of consider that the final mile of design systems, capital D, capital S in general. We think that problem is going to be really interesting to solve. We're working on it. Our other design system engineers and designers are back in the corner, so be sure to hit them up afterwards. But in our situation, because of this conversational nature that we have during the development of a component, you get this, you get a sketch file, and then Alice and I are talking, and we're making pixel tweaks, right? And she's making notes like, oh, okay, I gotta go back so that the designers have the pixel tweaked thing that we decided on on it goes, right? We think it would be really cool to design those sketch files once, get the basic premise in place, build the component, and then have the component be the source of truth. So we're working on a system that as our components are repackaged and versioned, we're gonna read the HTML that those components produce, regenerate sketch components, and repopulate our library. So that's a thing we're working on. We know other teams are working on it as well, but we'll let you know next year after we've gotten that solved. Okay, I'll read this. Mo says, what is the balance between designing and building components that are highly extensible for future use versus limited to what's needed currently? Mo, do you want to, all right. Either one of you want to take this?
So I think that the designing and building may be kind of some separate answers here. So I'll stick to the building side. With the way that we have it split between elements and those containers and views, we kind of treat the containers as the most basic form of accessibility and navigation that we know we will always want. There is really only 1 or 2 ways of doing accessible tabs, and that is all our engineering assets around containers deal with. So there's really kind of no limitation. Well, let me knock on wood for that one, but there really is very little limitations around having a model that only deals with that and then treating the visual assets as a separate thing. Right now, we treat all of our components as individual packages and individual assets that are available to our engineers. So the Garden design system spans over many different things. It isn't just a single piece of code that we provide to engineers and they're able to consume it. Because each of these components, the tables, tabs, buttons, forms, every individual segmentation is modified at different rates. So let's say we have a new design in tables and we make that a breaking change. With most design systems, when it is a mono package, a single item that you consume, you can run into a lot of issues where you cannot upgrade small accessibility fixes or bug fixes because you have to fix those larger issues. So we actually provide every grouping of components as an individually versioned artifact. So that way people can upgrade them individually. And that is, I think, making the ease of upgrade, making the upgrades easier solves a lot of that flexibility issue from when it's built to when it's actually consumed. And on the design side.
All right. How do you handle working with multiple designers in different geographies? Anonymous, do you want to be recognized for? Oh, okay, gotcha. You've got your swag.
No worries. The answer is with a lot of conversation. It is imperative that I know who I'm working with and that the other designers know me. We all need to be comfortable with each other. They need to be comfortable to come up and tell me that, hey, something's not working for me and I'm not going to be able to use this stuff unless it changes. And so the way that we do that, I'm based in San Francisco. We do these trips to the different offices a couple times a year so that we get FaceTime with everybody. And then we have bi-weekly syncs on video conferencing. So we give each other updates on what we're working with. Often I will be tired and make comments that I later regret. But in general, like just good human conversation to keep in touch and keep those lines of communication open. The other thing that I think is really important is being very responsive. As the person who kind of shepherds the design for the entire system, if someone has a question, I need to answer it as quickly as I can. That's, like, to me, one of the most important responsibilities of my job. It's difficult when we are international. You know, if someone asks me a question and they're in Melbourne, I might not get that question until 18 hours later. And that's why when a question comes, I answer it right away so that there is as little lag time as possible. I'm just going to stop there.
Sounds good. All right. Janice asks, how was the latest design principles update driven throughout the organization? All right. We can get some swag. Thanks for that question. So we went through several rounds of things. We have a process on the engineering side called tech review, where something is blessed for common usage throughout all the products. You know, with a product set like this, your tech stack can get a little mayhem. So we try and put some rigor around who gets to be the person who does, you know, is the decider. So Garden went through that process 3 times. We got it wrong twice, and that started to help. And then we take this on a roadshow. Like, we show up, we try and put a face to the name. A design system and these design patterns can sound a little imposing, like we're imposing our will on people, and we're here to serve our company and our end users, and we want that message to come out loud and clear. So just getting in front of people in the offices and helping us all remember that we're working together with the people at Zendesk, and you know, we kind of love each other and we want to like do the right thing. So that's probably a couple of the main ways that we've gotten this through. And then definitely support from our executives has been critical. Attica says, how do you contextualize a design process and know when to prioritize and/or eliminate certain steps in a resource-limited startup? Do you want to speak to contextualization, Allison, or would you like some clarification?
What'd you say?
Attica? Back here, thank you. Okay, after this, we'll take one more. I've been given the signal. You want to take that?
Yeah. Contextualize a design process, know when to prioritize and eliminate certain steps in a resource-limited startup. So In terms of contextualizing the design process, one of the things that I talked about is the importance of documenting the work that you're doing and kind of showing people how you arrived at certain decisions. And I actually think that that's one of the best ways or easiest ways to eliminate, as you're saying, like certain steps, right? You can put out a V1 and have it be the thing that you designed as long as you're able to justify why you made those calls. There's still certain things that you really shouldn't skip. You know, iteration, testing is a really big one. Make sure those things actually work in the different browsers when the code gets released. You kind of always need to go through at least like that one, at least one round, right, of design, feedback, iterate before you can get through a release. It's okay to release an MVP, but you have to go through those steps, I think, at least once.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add that as a central resource, our cadence turns out to be different than a product team's cadence. If we are able to add that extra level of rigor, the fact that it's central and kind of webs out from there pays dividends in the end. So sometimes convincing yourself to not skip a step could pay off, but that's, you know, clearly that's a startup. I've been part of a couple of them. I understand resource constraints. Rose asks, do brand guidelines and/or illustration styles / writing style, etc., belong in a design system, or should they exist separately? I'll kick this off by saying we have the unique opportunity at Zendesk as part of the creative team to be co-located with brand designers, which is really fun, and that gives us sort of a brand empathy for what we're doing. We love the idea of voice and tone, and I'm gonna go back to Allison to answer this properly.
I think the answer is it depends on your organization, but in my mind, yes. I don't know that they necessarily, let me rephrase this. They do belong in a design system. Your brand should be integrated into the software that you're building, right? It should be infused with that. And so your designers will need to understand what that means. What does it mean to have a Zendesk software experience? Being able to understand what kind of feelings you want someone to have. It does bear some documentation within your system. But the nice thing about this is that if you have, as Zendesk does, and I recognize we're very lucky in this, but we have a brand design team, we have this product design team, we get to piggyback on their hard work and they get to piggyback on ours. They do the hard work of determining what is the voice and tone of Zendesk, and we just get to use that. They help us come up with illustration styles, and we get to kind of ingest that into the system as well. So you guys can have a little bit of a give and take with that.
I'm sorry, did we catch who Rose was for swag? Rose? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been delightful. We'll stick around and enjoy some time together.